Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The time my friend and I were spooked by an escaped prisoner, by Anonymous. This story takes place in a very small town in the northeast region of the United States in the summer before I went off to college in 2015. After I graduated high school, my parents decided to move to a smaller, more affordable house about 45 minutes north into the mountains. We stayed in my childhood home because the public schools in my area were the best in the state, and my parents really valued my education. I ended up going off to an amazing university, and now I have an incredible career because of my excellent education. As most people in the U.S. know, amazing public education usually means higher property taxes. My parents got to the point where they could not afford the taxes on their 4,000 square foot home anymore and decided to sell it just after I graduated from high school. Their home is humble, and it sits on a beautiful piece of land on the side of a beautiful mountain. The trees are always so green, and there's a lot of wildlife around. They don't have many neighbors either, as their driveway is about 1.5 miles long. But this is what they chose to live in after I went off to college. In August of 2015, we moved into this new house, and I wasn't planning on staying long as I was getting ready to head off to college as a freshman for the first time. We decided to have a little housewarming party with a bunch of family friends and my best friend at the time as well. My dad was manning the barbecue, my mom was making drinks, and we were playing with our dogs. It was a grand time, and everyone had so much fun. My dad had built a brick fire pit in our backyard. So, just to set the scene for you here, the fire pit was about 30 feet from our back patio door, and we had a picnic table and other seats all around. Behind the seating was the tree line. It was so dark sometimes at night you needed a flashlight to see 10 feet in front of you. With the fire pit lit, you couldn't see someone else unless they were either sitting next to you or across from you in front of the pit. My best friend decided to stay the night, and we asked my dad if we could make s'mores. As it was getting a little chilly as it does in the late summer in the Northeast at night, my parents left us outside with my dog Nino. Nino was a huge 100-pound black lab pit bull mix. He was such a loyal and incredible dog that my dad trained as his right hand. He was our protector, as he could run extremely fast, was very strong, and alerted us when something went bump in the night. Side note, he passed away a week before I got married in 2022. He was 17 years old and lived an adventurous life with my parents, hunting squirrels, laying out in the sun, and running amok. Nino laid in between us, facing the tree line, and my best friend was to my right. Our backs were to the dense, dark tree line. Our first mistake. We were laughing, joking, and eating s'mores together, planning for the future, and generally excited about going off to college together. She decided to play some music, and we just relaxed, feeling content and at ease. It was the perfect summer night. Until Nino started growling. I saw his ears perk up and his head cocked to the side. He then sat up and continued to growl, and my best friend and I both looked at each other, thinking Nino just saw a stray animal or something non-threatening. This area was known for lots of deer, and rarely a coyote or wolf. As he was trained to help my dad hunt deer, we assumed it was a buck or fawn in the distance behind us. So we just went back to singing along to the music playing and talking about our fall 2015 class schedule. Again, Nino started growling. Our second mistake. We didn't call out for my dad. We didn't even think there was a problem until Nino started barking repeatedly. This time louder and more vicious. He stood up and started barking as if alerting us to activity behind the tree line that we couldn't see. We stood up as well, the fire obscuring our view. My best friend took her phone, paused the music, and turned on her flashlight. She started to walk toward the edge of the tree line with Nino by her side, still growling and barking, alerting us to not go any further and to call for help. We stood still in silence, listening. I was too afraid to even breathe at this point. She started walking into the woods, and when she shined her flashlight, she saw a figure, someone peering behind a tree. A man with a green shirt and green pants on. He was about 5'11" with glasses, too. We screamed and ran as fast as we could inside, leaving the fire unattended and this creepy man behind the tree. What we did not know at the time is where this man came from. We crashed through the door, breathless with Nino trailing behind us, and startled my mother, who was washing dishes and cleaning up from the party. She was talking to my dad about something they saw on the news, and I think we cut him off mid-sentence to explain that there was a man dressed in all green lurking behind a tree in the woods. We didn't know how long he was there or if he was still there, but we were both crying. I remember feeling extremely sick, like I was going to throw up. My dad jumped up, grabbed his shotgun and headlamp, and ran outside with Nino. My mom gathered us into the living room, shut off all the lights in the house, and locked the doors. She told us to be quiet and that she was going to call 911. As she did that, my best friend and I shook in fear. We were anticipating gunshots and screaming, but never heard any. My mom was now on the phone with 911, described what we saw to the operator, and I heard my mom say, "Oh," in an alarming way. At this point, my dad came back inside, and my mom let him know that the police were on their way to us. Being in a small town on the mountain with less than 10,000 people means that we don't get our own police force. We get the state police every time there is a call made to emergency responders. My dad put his gun away and waited outside for the police to show up. And to our bewilderment, they didn't just send one police officer, but 10 and an entire SWAT team and helicopter to circle the area. We were rightfully terrified. I was practically having a panic attack at this point. The police officers came inside our home and asked my best friend and me what the man was wearing, what he looked like, if we were able to discern any scars or tattoos. We explained the weird matching green outfit and the glasses. The officer excused himself and alerted the police and SWAT members outside of our description. They started to search the woods behind our home with guns drawn, flashlights, and the helicopter circling above. They advised us to stay inside and that they would let us know when and if they found something. After about 25 minutes, we got another knock on our door. There were not one but two officers this time. My dad let them in and they began to explain the situation. One officer explained that we must have seen on the news that a convicted felon from the prison about 20 miles away escaped into the mountains. The police set up a perimeter 10 miles around the prison, but the convict escaped them yet again. The outfit the man was wearing, as well as our description, signaled to them that the escaped convict was 100% lurking through our remote, densely wooded backyard that night. The all-green outfit was a standard issue for prisoners in my state then. They did not, however, find the man near us after 25 minutes of searching. He was still out there. The officers let us know they were going to have a squad car stay and watch our house for a few days as they were unable to locate the fugitive and believe he is still an active threat to our safety. That night, and for 3 nights after that, we all slept in the living room together. My dad's shotgun was within arm's reach of him at all times. And later that week, we got another knock on our door from the officers stationed outside of our home. They let us know the man was back in police custody and that we were safe. They advised us to get security cameras and also how sorry they were for this happening to us. After that, my parents spent about $10,000 on security cameras and fencing for our backyard. It's now all fenced in, and we have about 4 cameras to watch the tree line at all times. I guess you never know what will happen or what goes bump in the night. To the escaped convict and perhaps murderer who watched my best friend and I sing along to 2015 pop hits from your hidey hole behind my parents' isolated home, let's never meet again. That Time I Accidentally Dated a Sociopath by Abby Amok. It's taken me many years to tell this story out of both fear and embarrassment. I share this today as more than simply therapy for myself, but as a warning to all people. Be careful who you meet on social media. In 2018, my ex-husband and I were at the end of a very tumultuous marriage. He and I had been polyamorous for about 3 years before I met this guy. His name was Jez. I met Jez on OkCupid. I was 28 and he was 42, and we hit it off very quickly. After a few weeks of talking, I agreed to meet up with him at a restaurant close to my house. We sat and talked for a few hours before I invited him over to meet my husband. Things went very well and they seemed to get along, so Jez and I started dating. This guy completely swept me off my feet. Jez was sweet and caring. He enthusiastically listened to every little thing on my mind, engaged, and validated me. Over and over again, he absolutely revered me for my strength and wisdom. He practically worshipped me for all that I was and all I was becoming. He showered me with gifts, flowers, and random good deeds just to make me feel safe, wanted, and cared for. I had never been in a relationship that felt quite like that. It was wonderful. It was as though we had been looking for each other for years. After the first few weeks, he had a meltdown over my polyamorous nature. He pulled the plug because he said he was already falling for me and couldn't handle sharing me. I stood my ground and accepted this boundary and the fact that I would have to let him go. I left that night, sad but confident that I had done the right thing for the both of us. That next week, he sent me flowers and a card to my workplace, begging for another chance and reassuring me that he would rather try than not and end up regretting it. Even though it was scary, he wanted to take this journey with me. We continued dating, and it was just as wonderful. Long nights we spent awake talking, sharing, laughing, making love, and planning. We went places and did things that I had always wanted to do. Then in the deepest, most intimate moments, when we would just sit in silence, he would grip my hand to his face in solidarity and astonishment, asking where I'd been all this time. Our time together was effortless. We fit together like puzzle pieces. By August of 2018, my marriage had ended, by no fault of Jez's, and by October, my husband had moved out. I was on a lease at the time and knew I couldn't afford the place on my own, so finding a roommate was essential. I had no support system to fall back on, nor did anyone else I know need a place at the time. So Jez offered to move in. Even then I was hesitant. We had only been together about 4 months, and I knew everything always changes when you move in with a partner. Despite my hesitation, I agreed. He was wonderful to me. I mean, how bad could it be? I was not prepared for the change that was to come. It was literally like night and day. Jez suddenly became a different person. He was extremely controlling, jealous, and lazy, nothing like the person I thought I had met. And the way he treated me progressively got worse and worse. Hanging out with friends became a burden, if not impossible, because he would blow up my phone, guilt me about leaving him alone or not involving him in some way. Yet when I tried to, it was also treated as a burden and inconvenience, as he would huff and puff his way through even the concept of leaving space for anyone but ourselves. In December of 2018, we attended my work Christmas party. I'd given him the option whether he wanted to go or not. It was really neither here nor there for me, especially because I had already learned that he really didn't do well if he felt pressured into social situations. But I opened the invitation to him because he had expressed to me over and over that it was important for him that he was involved in my social life. For the full month he knew about it. He insisted that he wasn't going. I took that as being introverted and didn't push the issue. I let him know that I would make sure he felt welcome if he decided to go, but not to feel obligated. I was surprised when he changed his mind at the last minute and insisted on going, and even more stunned when we went and he actively acted as though he did not want to be there. Everyone there was incredibly welcoming and included him in the festivities and conversation. However, he still practically grumbled the entire night about the whole thing, mumbling insults and critiquing every little part of the party under his breath, as though being there was absolutely awful to have to endure. No one really seemed to notice the low whispering insults and gripes. And at one point, after a couple of glasses of wine, my direct manager leaned into Jez and started praising him. She and I were very close, therefore she was intimately familiar with what I had gone through with my ex-husband. "I'm so happy she has you," she bleated, thoroughly wine-happy. "You've been absolutely transformative for her. It's so nice to see her finally happy and appreciated." Without missing a beat, Jez grimaced at the comment and quickly snapped back, "You don't fucking know me." I honestly didn't believe my ears. It was one of those moments where time stops and you just know you couldn't have heard that correctly. I sat brewing on it for a minute before another lighthearted interaction with Jez prompted him to suddenly snap at me through gritted teeth. "Stop it!" This triggered me, and I lost it. I pulled him outside and asked him what his problem was. I called out his behavior and told him if he was going to act that way, then he could just leave. That if he didn't want to be there, he should have just stayed home. He ended up giving a sort of half-assed apology, and we went back inside and finished the party. I remember the drive home that night, staring out the dark window at nothing in particular in worried silence. I might have messed up was my only thought through the entire drive. This all started out slow, of course, like waving me away or invalidating my experiences and ideas due to my age. That I was just dramatizing my experiences because I was young and so on. The man who, not 6 months prior, had validated me, my trauma and experiences to the ends of the earth. Now every time I started a story or tried to share anything, even trying to plan out meals for the week, he would openly show annoyance as though I was violating his time and attention. Before I knew it, he was snapping at me over every little thing. If I asked how his day was or talked about my day, he would aggressively shut it down. "Why do you always ask me that? I don't want to talk shop at home. I don't really care about your work. It's work." Before I knew it, I couldn't even bring him a plate of breakfast without being snapped at. It was as though he was testing me. When Jez and I first started dating, he flat out refused to talk about most of all of his exes. He refused to name them or discuss any of their issues or lessons learned. They didn't matter, he would claim. They weren't in his life for a reason. It was the same reasoning he also used in reference to my more recent exes, and talking about them, including my now ex-husband, may as well have become off limits. Anytime I brought up either of our exes, he would become incredibly agitated, belittling, and just overall very aggressive. I took this as both an age gap issue, as I have a tendency to dwell, as well as insecurity and a threat to the life he was trying to build. However, after he moved in and this hot topic button had been established, several times he would bring up his exes and how they looked, telling me on more than one occasion he would never have dated me back in the day, and that I was lucky he lowered his standards. I didn't even really know what to say to this. I would laugh it off and shove it in my back pocket. Noted. He then started bringing up my looks and accusing me of catfishing him. I'd stopped taking care of myself due to the isolation, and had also put on some weight, so most of my clothes that I had once felt great in no longer fit. And since Jez had also been dishonest with me about his financial position, he was always needing extra money here and there, leaving me broke almost all of the time. A horrible tragedy happened that following summer while Jez and I were together. I received notice that a good friend I went to art school with shot himself in the head while tripping on LSD. Our whole class was devastated. He was, without contest, the best photographer of our class, and one of the most kind-hearted individuals I have ever had the pleasure of knowing. Also, as someone who was very familiar with LSD, I was rocked. Jez, however, was far from supportive. He pretty much immediately shrugged it off. "That's life. I guess that's what he gets for fucking around with LSD." I was baffled at such an unsympathetic response, and even more later when Jez started to interrogate me about my relationship with this guy, asking when the last time it was that I had even talked to this friend. "You don't even know this guy anymore. Who cares?" I broke up with him the first time after he called me at work raging. I was busy, so I wasn't able to answer right away, but once I was finally able to answer, I was met with intense anger. It was storming and one of my dogs was having an anxiety attack due to storm and separation anxiety. This wasn't the first time, and he was well aware of what she needed in those moments. "Why the fuck aren't you answering my calls? You answer when I call you. I don't care where you are." He went on for a few minutes, calling me a shitty girlfriend and laying into me over my sudden distance and lack of communication while I was at work. At this point, I was done, and I lost it. I tore into him over everything, especially causing problems for me at work. That being in my life is a privilege, and if he's going to wake up every day acting like he hates me, then I don't know what on earth he's even doing with me. I told him that I expected him to get his things and leave. He was always threatening to go back to his old roommates where there was still a room. I didn't want him there when I got home, and we could coordinate times for him to come and get the rest. He flat refused, suddenly victimizing himself, claiming he had nowhere to go. "How dare you make me fall in love with you? How dare you take me to meet your father and then dump me?" My manager and her husband ended up following me home that evening because she was concerned for my safety and had offered to let me stay with her for a few days. I will never forget the scene I walked into. Like Theon Gregjoy begging for his life, my boss stood next to me watching as this 42-year-old man crawled on his knees before me, begging for mercy and communication. At one point, he wrapped his arms around my legs, crying into them. "I can't believe this is happening. She's the love of my life, you know that?" he cried to my boss. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. This was the antithesis of the heartless person I had been spending my days with. I shook him off and went to the back of the house, gathering enough of my things to get me through the next few days, as well as any and all valuables I could think of. It took a few days, but after about a week, Jez started blowing up my phone. Apology after apology. Suddenly, he was the man I met again, full of humility and self-awareness. He acknowledged the awful way he had treated me and sent me walls and walls of well-thought-out messages, psychoanalyzing his own behavior, where it comes from, and the ways he knows it needs to change. I took him back. Like a dumb, desperate girl, I took him back. It wasn't long into this second round that he started to guilt me over the breakup. My panic had damaged his relationship with the people in my life, and he made sure that I knew it was my responsibility to fix it. It wasn't long after this that my car ended up breaking down at a gas station close to home. There was a very nice couple in the vehicle next to me that came to my rescue and checked things out under my hood. The gentleman turned out to be a mechanic for a living, so he had a pretty good theory about what could be potentially going on. By this time, I had already attempted to contact Jez to let him know what was going on and where I was. It wasn't long till he got off work, so he told me to sit tight and he would be there shortly. Meanwhile, this sweet couple stayed put and kept me company while I waited. Jez barreled in about 15 minutes later, completely ignoring the couple that had helped me. Touching base, the gentleman handed me a slip of paper with a name and phone number on it, reviewing what he thought was going on with my car. Before Jez butted in, cutting him off. "I said she's fine," he snapped. I could see the woman out of the corner of my eye slink away at this comment and get into the passenger seat of their car. I could feel the sudden tension, like maybe she's been here before. The gentleman didn't move and shifted his attention to me as Jez walked into the store. I could see he was clearly concerned. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low, almost whisper. "You don't have to answer that, but if you need anything..." He looked down at the number in my hand and nodded to it seriously. With that, he got into the driver's seat of his car and drove away. I've thought about that couple countless times since that night. Everything went right back to the way it was before, as though the initial breakup never even happened. The same eggshells, the same belittling. If anything, it was worse because I had permanently damaged our relationship. If I had just not been so dramatic, if I didn't run away from everything, then maybe he wouldn't have to work so hard for respect in my life. One night we got into an argument. I don't even remember what it was about, but I had to be up early for work the next morning, so I paused the argument in order to get some sleep. When I went to lay down, I heard the TV turn on. I have a soundbar, so the volume can get pretty loud. Jed proceeded to turn the volume up and up and up, far past any volume I'd ever pushed those same speakers to be for even parties. The very walls were reverberating with the sound of the TV at astronomical volumes. Jez then started laughing hysterically. It was a laughter manic with anger, as though something might be funny on TV, but he might also jump through a window right now. I remember laying in bed absolutely horrified at what was happening. I knew things had gotten bad, but now I was scared. I got out of bed and asked him to turn it down, to which he responded, scoffing, "I'll watch TV if I fucking want to," and turned it up even louder. I felt like I was in a horror movie. I started crying at this point, begging him to please, please just let me sleep. He started mocking me and calling me names for crying. "Oh, poor baby is crying again. That's your card, isn't it? Crying?" This caused the fight to start again, and he started screaming at me, followed me to my bedroom where he suddenly punched a door not 2 inches from my head. His eyes were black, and he looked me in the eye, sending the clear, unsympathetic, and hostile message that this was a warning, and the next time he wouldn't miss. My whole system had shut down at that point, and I sunk to the floor in a panic attack. My ex-husband had issues with violence. Jez knew that. All our rentals prior to that one had holes in the wall and doors peppered throughout our unit due to my ex-husband's inability to handle his emotions. But he never hit me or even came close to it. I crumpled to the ground feeling powerless, trapped, and afraid. As my thoughts continued to race, he continued to berate and mock my panicked state. Most of our argument from that night was a blur, but ended abruptly once he threatened to put my social security number on the dark web. At this point, all that was left in me was to fight. I blacked out and went ballistic, screaming at him to get out. I felt rabid and dangerous as I screamed like a banshee for him to leave my home. It was over, and I was ending it that second. I contacted my landlord and explained what had been going on, and Jez would also end up contacting her, weaving his own tale that I was moving out, and tried to have the lease transferred into his name. Luckily, since I was several steps ahead of him, my landlord didn't fall for it and contacted me immediately. She personally came and changed my locks for me, gave the personal contact of a police officer close by in case he showed up again, and took half off my rent for the next month. I'm forever grateful to her for these simple acts of kindness that were above and beyond anything I would ever expect from a landlord. It took weeks for him to stop messaging me. The only reason I didn't block him was out of fear that he would show up at my house. Though I had contacts for protection, I knew I would rather get a daily apology video than have to deal with him on my doorstep. So they persisted. For a while. The same act from before. The love bombing, the promises, grabbing at straws, trying to find the weak spot where I would let him back in. But I ignored it. It continued for weeks before he finally gave up. He bowed out gracefully, stating boldly that he will always love me. I left him on read. The illusion was destroyed. It took me several years to pick up the pieces. And if my divorce wasn't enough, this definitely made me lose trust in myself. I still don't understand what the end game was. In one of our last discussions, I asked him desperately, what happened to the guy I fell in love with? Jez looked at me dead in the eye, smirked, and said, "That guy doesn't exist. I told you what I had to tell you in order to get you away from that fucking asshole husband of yours. You're just stupid and fell for it. Jez, let's not meet, ever again." D&D Girl Mistake, submitted by Floyd W. Yeah, I play D&D. Shoot me. I don't care what anyone says. It's no different than plugging into a computer or Xbox and blowing away a few hours. It's all the same, and I have a good time. I should mention I'm 27, and while I'm not Brad Pitt, I'm not the guy who lives in Mom's basement either. This happened last year around this time. I'd broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years in an amicable split. Her job took her elsewhere, and we are still really good friends despite not being a couple. These things happen. I'm going to keep this short and sweet, but it's the most fucked up thing that's ever happened to me. My friend owns a comic book store in my town, and every other Thursday night we play D&D there. There's 6 of us, 4 guys and a girl who will all remain nameless for the story. I would usually get there around 6:30, and my friend and I would have a bite and a beer and get things set up. He closes shop at 7 on Thursdays, but sometimes there's still people meandering around the comics and other stuff he sells, so the rest of us just hang out. Well, on this particular night, right before he was closing up, this woman came in, early 20s, really sexy, and started checking out everything in the store. We were all just hanging out having a beer or two waiting to get the game going, but she just wasn't leaving. Finally, my buddy said, "Hey, I'm closing up shop," and then she noticed us getting ready to play. Out of nowhere, she asked if she could join us. And my buddy, the DM, looked at us and we all said, "Hey, why not?" One of my friends pulled her aside and started rolling her up a character, and we all settled in for a couple hours of harmless gaming. She took a seat next to me, and I'll call her Nikki. She had played before, so it was easy for her to get into things, but I did notice that she kept looking at the door of the place, even though my buddy had pulled the shades on the windows and door. She just kept doing it all night long. Anyway, it was a fun night, and we were wrapping things up just before 10, and she asked me if I wanted to get a drink elsewhere. We'd had a pretty good rap going all night, and I was actually thinking about asking her for her number, but here she was asking me out. Sold. We left and walked up the street and went to a dive bar I'd been to before and had a couple of more beers. All the while she was talking to me, but she kept looking around the place as if waiting for someone to come in. No one she knew did, and that's when I offered her a ride home. She accepted and then in an embarrassed way told me where she actually lived. It was not the nicest part of town we were in, but hey, I'm never one to judge someone on that sort of thing. I suppose maybe I should have thought better of it on this night, though. We got to my car and I started making my way through town to the seedier side of life when I noticed lights coming up right behind my car. At first I thought it was just someone wanting to pass, but the car hit the brights and I got a little pissed. Nikki said something under her breath that I didn't catch, but just then a cop was coming from the other direction and the car behind me backed off. He soon turned down a different street, so I breathed a little easier. I got to her apartment, and it was an upper, and she asked me if I wanted to come in. Score, I thought. We got inside her place, and it was a total shitbox on the outside, but pretty nice inside. Getting a couple of beers, we sat on our couch talking when I heard some heavy footsteps coming up her stairs, and then a massive banging on her door. "Open up, bitch. I know you're in there." Nikki looked at me, and I thought, oh, fuck, her boyfriend. Great. That's just great. She didn't move, but the pounding kept up, and then a low voice said, "Open the fucking door. Don't make me wait another minute." Nikki got up, opened the door, and in walked 3 of the biggest human beings I've ever seen. "Who the fuck is this guy?" said the biggest dude. Before Nikki could say, he just kind of backhanded her away and walked over to me. I put a hand up and said, "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." He just stared at me and then laughed. "Get your coat, bitch." He was speaking to Nikki, not me. "What, do you think you're coming with us, punk?" That was directed at me. Nikki said, "He's got nothing to do with this, B," and he just continued staring at me. For a second I felt like I was in that crazy scene with Frank in Blue Velvet, you know, that movie, and that I was going for a ride. The dude just said, "Where's the shit?" And Nikki left the room and came back with a duffel bag and handed it to him. "Take your ass down to the car," he said, and Nikki sort of looked at me and then left with the 2 other guys. The big dude then pulled out a gun. Fuck me if I know what kind it was, but he put it right up to my forehead. "This never happened. You were never here. You never met her, and you sure as shit don't remember me." Then he picked up my beer and handed it to me and said, "Drink up. Wait 5 minutes, then get the hell out of here and don't come back." He put the gun away and left, I was shaking with disbelief, but did exactly what he said. I sat there and finished my beer, waited 5 minutes, and then got up to leave, but not before grabbing 2 more beers out of the fridge. My nerves were shot, and I was still thinking I could be shot on my way out. I got down to my car, and there was no one in sight, so I just got my ass out of there. I drank the 2 cans on my way home with the adrenaline totally kicking in, and I was literally shaking. I got to my place, got inside, had another beer, and then just sat in the darkness wondering what the hell had just happened. I never saw Nikki again. When I asked around at the dive bar, no one there knew who she was, and she certainly never went to my buddy's shop again. I've driven past her apartment a couple of times, but there's not enough money in the world for me to go up there and see if she's there. So, yeah, I have no idea what went down that night, and figure it's for the best that I don't know. What I do know is I've never seen a gun up close like that before, and I never want one pointed at me again either. Lesson learned. If something looks too good to be true, it probably is. We keep the D&D game closed to just friends now. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on my channel or podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. My apologies for being a little late with some content here. Got a number of other projects I've been working on. I've just wrapped up 2 books for Audible, and I'm working on another that it's a little bit longer, so that's taking up a lot of my time. But I promise I've got more stories in the kitty to share with you, and looking forward to doing that. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, like, share, leave a comment. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And of course, follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. If you'd like to take the support a little bit further, find me on Patreon. You can support me there. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.